Okay, let's turn to the ticker where we're taking you beyond the headlines and looking closer at some of the stories that you may have missed. I'm joined by Benjamin Barber. He's the author of Consumed: How Markets Corrupt Children, Infantilize Adults, and Swallow Citizens Whole. And, of course, Peter Schiff. He's the author of The Little Book of Bull Moves in a Bear Market and a recently announced Republican candidate for Senate in Connecticut. Gentlemen, thank you to both of you. I always wonder, and certainly we always wonder at CNN when things like this G20 come up, what sort of coverage we should afford to it. How important are these summits to everyday lives? Let's start with you, Benjamin.
Well, they're important because they represent not just Europe, the United States, Asia, and Latin America, but they represent the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and it's really financial ministers and people in charge of the global economy getting together. Whether they do something or not isn't the point. The question is, whatever they do or don't do is going to impact our lives. So we need to watch what they're doing closely.
It's emblematic of globalization, Peter, good or bad?
Well, you know, there's a lot of hypocrisy, though, going on at the G20. Because remember, Barack Obama has stated that, you know, he wants to try to address the global economic imbalances, which we need to do. Barack Obama says that Americans need to save more and that the Chinese need to spend more. But how can we do that? We're running near a $2 trillion deficit pursuing his programs. How can Americans possibly save more when the government is leading the charge deeper into debt? And how can the Chinese spend more when they're lending us all their money?
Let's have our little G3 right now. Benjamin, what do you think about that? Peter's been on this case about how the government shouldn't have been involved in the bailout. They shouldn't have been involved in stimulus. They shouldn't have been spending any of this money that gets us further into debt.
Right. Peter's running for office. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on in the world. And the difference about that is that if you're going to say Obama's the problem and the banks are the solution, you got it exactly backwards. The banks, the financial institutions brought us into this crisis. Government under Obama's leadership is helping us get out. And the real question is whether we're going to allow the government to do what it needs to do to regulate the banks, to bring them under control, or are you going to turn things back over to the same banks that bankrupt them?
You got us topic number 2, regulation. There are a number of people at G20 who were in favor of massive centralized regulation for some of these financial institutions, which, Peter, even you have to agree, drove us into this abyss.
Well, it was the government, it was the Federal Reserve and Congress that provided the moral hazard that regulated the banks into this crisis. If the free market had been allowed to function...
Tell me what you mean, your moral hazard. You mean that they provided them with a parachute, a place to land if they did bad things?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve was giving money away under Alan Greenspan, and now it's giving it away even more under Ben Bernanke. But then you had the federal government guaranteeing all these debts. The government was guaranteeing the obligations of Fannie and Freddie. The government was encouraging people to make all these risky loans. Without that government enticement, without those guarantees, none of these risky loans ever would have taken place.
How about this as a starting point, Benjamin? What about bonuses? Bonuses for CEOs of financial companies, senior executives of financial companies. We don't seem to be making the headway there that many average Americans would like us to be making.
2 points. One, I agree that we shouldn't have bailed out the banks. Give them a good dose of capitalism. They go under, and take the consequences. But we did that. Once we did it, the banks have no right to be once again making these $100 million bonus packages for people who are taking risks, and they're being rewarded for the short-term risks they take when the long-term financial consequences of what they do has been disastrous. There have to be limits on bonuses, and bonuses should be tied. I'm all for bonuses, great idea, market incentive, but it's got to be a bonus when you do good, not when you do bad. We're rewarding people for short-term risk-taking that's been disastrous and penalizing them for long-term conservatism and prudence, which is what we should be rewarding them for.
This is a slippery slope we went down. I agree. We should have let these companies fail. These executives should have gotten pink slips, not bonuses. But now that the government has bailed them all out, they're now public utilities. And now investment bankers are civil servants, and obviously they're overpaid, and now the government has to step in and control it. But it would have been much better if we let these institutions fail.
Is it important that we all get together, these 20 nations, and have these discussions, or should America decide to regulate the way it wants to, let Europe do what it wants to do, let Canada and Japan do what they want to do? Is this an important conversation?
It would be if they can actually accomplish something. What I'd like to see is nations like China to tell the United States, we're not buying your T-bills anymore, so you've got to get your house in order.
But would you really like to see that? Because we'd all suffer if that happened.
No, we wouldn't suffer. The government would suffer. We would benefit. The government is taking all this money and using it to expand government and to undermine our market economy. They are leading us into debt. We have to pay back trillions of dollars with interest.
to talk about the government as if it's some foreign Martian bureaucracy that has the government is our representatives, our people representing the public interest against banks which claim to do that, but in fact pursue their own interest in disastrous ways, the consequences of which we have seen. So to talk about the government,
the politicians,
I'm talking about the American people, the citizens, and the taxpayers. That's the government. That's us, and we have a right to control the banks.
What are you going to do differently? You're running for office. What would you do? Because you're going to get in there if you win, and you are now going to be part of the government.
Right, and I want to
Is it all bad?
Pretty much. I mean, I got to go there to clean up the mess. Look, the government is the source of these problems. They have regulated and printed our way into bankruptcy. The economy is a mess in the United States right now. We are consuming too much.
And AIG and Citibank, they're the heroes?
No, they're not. Okay. They're not the heroes. But they took all that cheap money supplied by the Federal Reserve. They got drunk on the Federal Reserve's alcohol. I want to make sure we stop supplying alcohol to the bankers and Wall Street. We need sound money, and we need to shrink government, not grow it.
Last word to you.
What we need is policies that support American taxpayers, American consumers, that keep Americans in their homes where the mortgage defaults have happened, that allow Americans to get back into the economy, not policies that prop up overspent banks that were the problem to begin with.
Well, I only hope they had that good a conversation at the G20. Thanks so much, gentlemen. Benjamin Barber is a senior fellow at Demos and the author of Consumed: How Markets Corrupt Children, Infantilize Adults, and Swallow Citizens Whole. And Peter Schiff is the author of Crash Proof 2.0. He's also a Republican candidate for the Senate in Connecticut. Christine?